Hello, and welcome to the Trepid Technologies Security Plus course. My name is Johnny Bannon, and I will be your instructor for this video series. This video will cover Domain 2.3 application development, deployment, and automation. Now let's get started. So I want to preface this video by going over kind of what this domain is and what you need to know as somebody going to take the Security Plus exam. So we're not software developers, right, as cybersecurity professionals. And the Security Plus exam objectives will not deep dive on a lot of these topics like you can, right? So in this, we're going to go over code reuse, the CI/CD pipeline, automation, and we're just going to talk about them holistically. What is automation? What is a code repository? That doesn't mean we're going to go over how to use Git, how to use automation tools like Ansible or Python or PowerShell. We're not going to get into actual provisioning of resources and showing you how to commit code to a repository through your change management system, right? This section or this domain in Sec Plus just wants you to become familiar with these concepts so that when you are a cybersecurity administrator working with the DevOps team, you understand the language and what they're talking about and how to better secure things in that development process. So with that being said, let's jump right into it. The software development lifecycle is the systematic approach developers will use to get applications and software into production. The Security Plus exam goes over 5 different stages of SDLC. However, they can be more or less depending on the tactics, techniques, and procedures in your organization. So let's go over our first stage. Development is the environment developers use to build their code and create their applications. So this could be a lot of things. It could just be your computer, that you have an IDE, that you start writing the code, and then you may have some sort of sandbox environment that you could also develop in as well. This happens a lot when developers work on a secret or TS network. Maybe that organization only wants their developer tools in a VM living on a server that they can manage. Next, we have the test environment. The test environment does function checks on code built by developers. So this is going to be your senior developers or even yourself doing some quality assurance on the actual code before we move it into our next environment, which is the staging environment. The staging environment is going to be the last environment code will see before being pushed and approved into production. So this is the environment that you'll see a sandbox that's trying to clone production or replicate production as well as it can, right? Because once the code or the application or website proves it can work in the staging area and it gets blessed off by either senior developers or senior management, then it's going to be pushed into our last environment, which is the production environment. The production environment is the live environment. This is the actual network and enterprise where you conduct business. So it's very important that we do all these checks before we go live with it, right? And then the last stage, I guess, step we talk about in SDLC is going to be quality assurance. Quality assurance describes any process that determines whether a product, or in this case, software, meets the organization's objectives and requirements. And quality assurance can be done at really any of these stages. Preferably, you want it done at the staging stage last, right? Because you want to do your last checks before going into production. But quality assurance can happen at the test phase as well. All right, moving on into integrity measurement or management. So a code repository is going to be standard from when developers are collaborating on code or developing code. And we're going to want to make sure that that code repository has some sort of integrity. So what is it? A code repository is where developers will store their source code. A common example of this will be something like github.com. This is where individual developers can go and post their code. A lot of people will post their libraries into GitHub, right? I come from a networking background, so a lot of the repositories I look at on there, like the NetMiko library for network automation. And the guy who created this library hosts it in GitHub. Another popular enterprise solution, one you can pay for a code repository that has a lot of features and stuff you can add into it, like CI/CD pipelines or Kanban boards, is GitLab. That's another web-based code repository using Git, the technology Git. So now let's jump back into the security aspect. We must have some integrity measures in place on our code repositories. We do this by either hashing a file in our Git repo or hashing the entire Git repo to produce some message digest right here. And then when somebody wants to clone our repo or clone just a file from that repo, they could run that message digest or that same hashing algorithm, and make sure that they match. So essentially, this slide is all that to say we use hashing for integrity of our code repositories. Next, we're going to talk about database normalization. So database normalization is something the Security Plus exam barely scratches the surface of. And again, I put that disclaimer in the beginning of the video to tell you that we're not database engineers either. What we need to know about is the normalization process and what it is. So for the exam, you must understand your enterprise's database normalization benefits. And the bottom line up front is that database normalization allows you to have consistency in your enterprise, allowing developers to meet business/organizational goals faster with less red tape. And why do we care about this as cybersecurity professionals? Because remember, this is the thing that guides us, the CIA triad. And that A stands for availability. So if we recommend for our database engineers and developers to use some sort of normalization process, or let's say we use some platform as a service from a cloud provider, we can provision code and applications faster, increasing our availability to our customers and to our enterprise. The next thing we're going to talk about is stored procedures. Stored procedures are an implementation of what we call parameterized queries. So we see that term, parameterized queries. And what this is a SQL injection attack prevention method, right? So a parameterized query only allows specific selection in an input field. This prevents malicious injection of code into input fields on your website. So we talked about a SQL injection and cross-site scripting attacks, where if we have an input field, you'll put some script bracket in there for cross-site scripting, or you'll put some SQL code in here, right? And if we don't have input validation, your front end will run that code and mess with the back end, right? Well, if we implement stored procedures or parameterized queries, we can only allow our customers or the people using our sites to choose a list, right? And this helps us prevent against those injection attacks because you can't type anything in there. So on the screen here, where is it that we see parameterized queries? It's going to be this drop-down list and this query-based drop-down list, right? Kind of tells you what it is right there in the name. The next thing we're going to talk about is obfuscation and camouflage. So obfuscation and camouflage are security concepts, right? These are terms that are going to prevent sensitive data from leaving your network. So what's the implementation of this? Well, the first one we're going to talk about is data minimization. Data minimization is a defensive attack against data exfiltration. Data minimization is a concept, a minimalistic concept in IT, where the mantra is, if you don't use it, lose it. So all this is saying is that if there's data on your network that isn't needed, get rid of it. And this is going to decrease your threat vector, right? And this is going to prevent unused data from being exfiltrated. And the next concept we have is tokenization. Tokenization is going to replace precise text data or data with a unique identifier. And then that unique identifier will then be sent instead of that clear text data. And then what you could also do with tokenization, and a lot of banks do this, is they'll have, let's say, a database or a file, right? Just to break it down easy for us, with an account number that equals a token, right? And so then this file in our database can be locked down and secure within our enterprise. And you can even run hashes against it. And then when your user logs into your banking's website, instead of their username and password getting sent across, it's just that token that's going to match up with this table, right? This lookup table that's going to correlate to that UID, which stands for unique identifier. Another thing companies and developers will do is they will reuse code, right? So you don't always want to reinvent the wheel. So let's say you're developing a website and you have the same HTML format for your homepage, for the contact us, for the about us page. Are you going to want to type all that code again? No. So you're going to reuse that code. And sometimes we can repackage this code and make what we call an SDK, or a software development kit, that we can distribute to our developers. The next thing we're going to talk about is OWASP. OWASP is it stands for the Open Web Application Security Project. And this is a free web-based, community-driven project that's going to give you best practices for protecting websites and also the top 10 or most common vulnerabilities that websites face. So here we see like a quick example of how this can help the community, OWASP. So Bob may be a web developer who does not have security in mind, right? His primary source of income is creating awesome looking websites. He's not a security practitioner, but he wants to start figuring out some best practices he can implement into his coding process to protect the websites he builds for his customers or for himself. Where he wants to go is that OWASP page. There he can find guides and proactive controls he can implement for his organization website. And they're going to tell you a lot of stuff that we should already be doing, like use MFA, right? Use multi-factor authentication. How to prevent against injection attacks. And now Bob can better secure his website in future web development projects because he has this resource in his toolkit. Next, we're going to talk about automation. So automation is just a concept, and it's very important in our enterprises. Automation is key to improving performance across your enterprise to get rid of manual tasks that are being done by administrators every day. So there are so many different automation tools that we can talk about, different frameworks and pipelines and concepts like the DevOps concepts, where we can start using automation to provision and get stuff to market faster, right? As an IT team. But for Security Plus exam, again, we just want to know holistic level of what automation is. And then we have the CI/CD pipeline. So CI/CD stands for continuous integration and continuous delivery. The CI/CD pipeline is going to start with continuous integration. And this is where developers will commit code consistently to then be pushed for delivery or deployment. Continuous delivery is going to include the provisioning and deployment of infrastructure in an automated way. So we're automating the production of containers or VMs to host our applications or our code. All right. So that is all we have for Domain 2.3, application development and automation. I want you to join us for our next video where we'll be covering Domain 2.4, authentication and authorization. Thank you for viewing.